in terms of being a receiver, easily the most dangerous receiver out of the backfield they have on the roster, and it's not even close. I really like his film.
Is he going to survive? Is he going to be on the roster?
You know, Skyy Moore is a guy that has done absolutely everything they've asked him to do.
So now that the main waves of free agency are wrapped up, the draft is over, and UDFAs are signed, the question is, how does this roster stack up for the Chiefs as they get ready for the 2025 NFL season? Well, that's why I had to have an in-depth conversation with Seth Kaiser about every draft pick, what to expect from them, and how things should look for the team as they prepare for training camp. So let's get into it. But first, how about those? All right, Seth, so a lot of people were hoping for the Chiefs' first-round pick. That did end up actually happening in offensive tackle Josh Simmons out of Ohio State. What are your thoughts there? I know the injury is a concern, but I read your article on it. Just give us the lay of the land on Josh Simmons and what you could see coming from him, whether it's this year or the very near future.
Sure. And so every conversation with him involves that risk of injury. And I really like the way Briscoe actually framed this, is that every draft pick comes with risk. You know, whether or not they'll translate, whether or not their physical attributes will carry on, whether they can improve on their tape, whether they can improve their technique, whether they can grow bigger, stronger, whatever, right? That's usually where the risk is with draft picks. With him, it's with the injury, because it's not with his tape at all. I mean, every draft pick, there's no sure things. But there's so many people, the people I respect most in the industry, in terms of grinding offensive lineman film, every one of them had him as offensive tackle one. It's not just on his 6 games in 2024. He was really, really good in 2023 too. And you saw a bump up from 2022 to 2023 to 2024. That's what you want to see. So all of this comes with the caveat. Yeah, we'll see what happens with the injury. We'll see if he's able to play this year. Maybe he is, maybe he isn't. Even if he doesn't, it's a great long-term investment at a position that's almost impossible to get top-tier talent at, even if it's only 5 years of control instead of 6. Because you'd really get 5 years of control even if he doesn't play this year, because you've got the 5th-year option and then the franchise tag. All of that is much better form of control than trying to overpay Trent Williams or whoever else. Guys don't hit the market. We saw that. Even Stanley, who's a good but not great left tackle, they just don't hit the market. It never happens. So in terms of his film, I really like the way one analyst framed it, and this was Brandon Thorne, who is probably the best guy out there covering offensive and defensive line. The way he framed it was, Josh Simmons is a player that you can build your run game around and your pass protection scheme around. And those guys are rare. He's got exceptional athleticism, like athletic enough to where people are like, well, what if he doesn't come back the same? If he comes back 90% the athlete he was, he's still an upper tier athlete at the position. He's also got tremendous upper body power, which is a rare combination to have. He uses his hands well too. He's just a combination of high level traits that all blend together really well. And because of that, you really can build your run game or your pass protection scheme around him. What I tell Chiefs fans, think about the way Andy Reid used to leave Mitch Schwartz on an island, and then he would slide protection to the left, provide extra help everywhere else. That's the type of player Josh Simmons has the potential to be. So I was absolutely thrilled with the pick when you take into account you're talking a top 5 talent that you were able to get at 32, and you got an extra 5th-round draft pick to boot.
Yeah, and that was for Jeffrey Bossa, who we'll talk about soon, and I really liked his presser. I think he'll fit really well in the defense. We'll see what happens this year, just like every rookie. I will say I just saw Josh Simmons signed his rookie contract, and to kind of piggyback on your point there of cost control, 4 years, $14 million. That's 1 year of Jalen Moore. And if you were to go get somebody like Ronnie Stanley, he signed for $20-ish million a year, but the top guys are getting way more than that. So That's why I am very happy with the pick and very excited to see. You mentioned it in your article, but he played right tackle early, switched to the left side. So regarding his future, he could be a starter this year if they feel like he's healthy enough, but next year he could be your right tackle if they're high enough on Jalen Moore to be your left tackle, and then he could be your left tackle in the future, talking about Simmons after that. So we were all pretty high on the Josh Simmons pick. Hey, real quick, if you guys are enjoying Seth's content, make sure to check out his Substack, the Chief in the North newsletter. He puts out 2 to 3 articles a week on average with insightful takes and film reviews on newly signed players, draft picks, in-game performances, and so much more. I'm somebody who would rather learn audibly or visually via a podcast or a YouTube video, but even I read his content because it brings so much value. And if you click the link in the pinned comment or description, you can get a yearly subscription to his Substack for just $12. Yes, that's $1 a month because at the end of the day, Seth really hates money. I think I liked the Chiefs' next pick. I was a little surprised where they got him, when they got him. It was pretty early, but that's defensive tackle Omar Norman Law out of Tennessee with the second round pick. I saw him mocked to the Chiefs quite a bit. Third, fourth round. You seem to come to the same consensus there of, I like the pick, but you were surprised how early they got him. What are your thoughts on Omar Norman Lott, the predominantly pass rushing interior defensive lineman?
Right. He's a guy, he's kind of interesting because there are people who view him as a first round talent, and there's people who view him as like a seventh round talent. And people either really like that pick or they really hated it. There's not a ton in between. The way that I've landed on it, and of course, I've reviewed the film of all of the draft picks except for a couple. The thing that I can see the vision. I can see, so he's got pretty heavy hands. He's able to disengage, free his hands up, and he can corner in a way that a lot of defensive tackles can't. He's got good burst off the line. So he has good traits that are important ones. The issue I would have is maybe his explosion off the line and cornering might be elite, but I'm not sure if they quite are. And everything else, yeah, his upper body power is solid, but it's not great. His lower body power isn't tremendous. He's a lighter guy. He's more refined than like Tershawn Wharton was, but he wins in some similar ways, having a decent combination of athleticism, but he's more nuanced in how he wins. The idea there is that you got a guy who can maybe come in and help the pass rush, add some juice immediately. The problem for me is that his film really wasn't dominant, in my opinion. I know everyone keeps talking about that pass rush win rate, but he played such minimal snaps that all he needed to do was win a couple of snaps a game, and that win rate jumps way up. Now, it's not his fault Tennessee rotated their defensive linemen out, and that's something they did with everyone. And there's a strategy to that, but can you play as well playing 35, 40 snaps as you did playing 18? Because there's a huge disparity there. I see the vision for it. It's not necessarily the direction I would have gone. The vibe I get from it is that they had their tiers of defensive tackles. They knew they needed one, and they knew the bottom was about to fall off. I think a lot of other people wanted the Chiefs. There were a couple other guys people would have preferred, but this was obviously the guy they did. Like I said, I see the vision. I see the vision for a good ceiling as a pass rusher. I just worry about the floor in his case. I don't view him as a high floor player. I view him as a player who potentially with the floor is you just don't get much out of him at all. And that's always tough. And that's the case for any draft pick, but that's tough with second round picks. It's a similar thing. And this is going to just drive Chiefs fans crazy, but like, not that they're similar players at all, but it's a similar thing with FAU, that idea that you can see the vision and how it could potentially develop, but you see some problems as to why it might not. Now, Norman Lott doesn't have one significant weakness like FAU does with his get off at the line, but just doesn't have that one dominant trait that tells me that he's going to be able to take that next step as to become a high-level pass rusher. We'll see. I hope I'm wrong, but that's kind of where I land, is that I see the vision, but it's not the route I would have gone.
I do think, I'm trying to remember post-draft, the pressers that happened. I think there was like a bit of a run on defensive tackles, and they wanted to get one of the guys that was still on their list, and then the pass rush emphasis of him. Yeah, there's a weakness there against the run, but the thought, you said it. You see the vision. You could put him alongside Chris Jones. Chris Jones is going to get all the attention, and you hope that you can develop this guy and help him with Joe Cullen and those guys develop his game, and he can win. So that's the hope. And some people might hear, well, hey, you compared him somewhat to Turk Wharton. Well, that's a win. Well, Turk Wharton went undrafted. So he's probably a bit of a rare guy that punched through, and now he's got a great contract with the Carolina Panthers. But you're just kind of hoping that as a second round pick that he pushes through and breaks through, because if you're trying to compare that to an undrafted guy, I mean, I think that's where a lot of us were like, oh, but yeah, the fact that they rotated linemen, we'll see. I'm definitely intrigued. Right. I'm also intrigued about the pick that they made 3 picks later. This was with the L'Jarius Sneed pick. All right, real quick, I want to shout out a couple ways you can support the channel. You can get some HBTC coffee of Benchwarmer Brew. This has got origin notes of Mexico and Ethiopia, a smooth medium roast, and it is one of the most popular blends of the lineup. Then you can also snag some HBTC merch. We've got Dad Bod Season, X Factor in honor of Dante Hall, mixed with Xavier Worthy, of course, and much more. Links to both the coffee and merch are in the description down below. They traded Sneed. They got this 3rd round pick from the Titans that ended up being one of the first picks. So it was only 3 picks later they got defensive end Ashton Gelati out of Louisville. What do you think about this guy? Super athletic. I think this was one of your favorite picks of the draft. I don't want to give everything away, but what are you thinking about him?
The semi joke that I've made to people is if I were to ask God to give George Karlaftis bend, but have the same amount of athleticism, the same amount of power, the same amount of motor, and God was like, okay, I can do that, but I'm going to make him an inch shorter, and his arms are going to be an inch shorter too. Ashton Gelati is what would emerge out of the ground. I really, really like his film. And a lot of people that I respect really like his film too. I think if he's got short arms, and that shows up on film sometimes. With guys I really like, I try to start off with the cons because I know I'm going to start gushing. So if you look at like the Miami game, they just have these enormous tackles. And every now and then you would have a couple of stretches where he just get kind of swallowed up because he doesn't have the length to get a long arm in there. And when those guys were able to make contact first, they were kind of able to swallow him up. It's tough when you're a power-based guy without length. And he doesn't have length, and it matters a ton. Chris Long actually had a great 2-minute clip on that where he talked about how just a 1-inch arm difference can feel like a foot when you're stretching that shoulder out. So he is a power-based rusher without really a long arm move. However, that really if you're looking for things to complain about with him or things to cherry pick, it would be okay. The body type just isn't enough. He's just not going to be able to overcome that. Everything else is tremendous. His film was excellent. Game to game to game, he was consistently really disruptive, more so than Norman Lott. It popped more often. One thing that, made the rounds on social media is that his sack numbers from 2023 to 24, they went from 11 to 4 or something like that. But his pressure numbers remained consistent. Sack numbers change. If a quarterback has a way to bail out of the pocket, you don't control that. That's whether or not the guy lined up across from you, the other defensive end, whether he did his job. And if he didn't, well, you did the same thing. You got the same amount of pressure, but you didn't get a sack. So pressures are much more predictive, and those stayed the same. And his tape, again, it was just consistently good. He's got the power to jar guys back with his upper body. He's got heavy hands. He frees them really well. He's got some bend around the edge to where he can corner a little bit. He's explosive off the line. He's got a powerful enough lower body that they actually lined him up on the interior at times. And I think he is just as good from the interior, which gives the Chiefs a lot of guys that are like that you can kind of rotate around. And a couple times he ended up on the field on the interior on rundowns and was actually able to hold up at the point of attack better than you'd think. You can see, he's a stout 265, 270, just built really, really thick, really, really strong, but a wonderful athlete too for the position. I would compare him to Karlaftis in that sense. Karlaftis doesn't have bend, but he's so athletic that he's able to win in other ways. But one thing that I think I might have liked the most about him, and I'm just pulling up right now to make sure I've got the list, is the fact that he's got a bag of pass rush moves. So I watched 4 games total, and he utilized, whether it was independently or in combination with one another, he utilized rips, downward swipes, some bull rushes, some push pulls, multiple cross chops that I think he's good enough that it could be foundational for him to corner in. Club moves, hump moves. He's got a nice stab swat that he then corners around. He's got a couple of one of the moves that he does, I don't even know what it's called. I probably should. I call it the Justin Houston special, where Houston used to, rather than trying to get inside the tackle or get to the edge, he would just, from straight on, he would just drive straight back. And by doing so, create a lane to move inside. It takes advantage of being a guy with some power. He utilizes that. He's got a swim move that he uses effectively. He even tried some spin moves. That one definitely needs some work. Because I don't think I saw him win with it once, but I love that he was trying it. And what's great is his hand usage. It's complementary. You see him, setting up one thing after another, and he's got a tireless motor. Never quits. One of the snaps that I tweeted out about was actually what I would call pass rush loss, because it took him 6 seconds to get pressure. But he lost the initial rep. Then he got smacked by a running back coming out of the backfield. But then he just kept moving, kept working, and was eventually able to break free and cause pressure because the coverage was there. It was a Karlaftis-like snap. Loved his film. Don't know how he's going to get on the field this year, because the Chiefs love Mike Dana, Charles Omena, who's healthy. They love George Karlaftis. He plays like at least 80% of the snaps. And if with how they feel about young guys, FAU knows the system. That matters. He is going to have to very clearly outplay guys to get on the field. And so, but I love his film. I think if he gets a shot, I think he'll keep swallowing up snaps.
Yeah, and he's great depth. Obviously, if you have to ask more of him as a rookie, if one of those guys gets hurt, maybe even two, God forbid, I mean, you could just never have enough of those guys. But then it's also, I see it as a move for the future. You can get out of Dana's contract after next year. Hugh's on a 1-year deal. They did pick up George's 5th-year option, which is great, but having some just younger bodies in there, looking at the longevity of the room as a whole, love the pick. Kind of like I love this next pick. I don't know how much he'll actually be on the field this year on defense just because of how the cornerback room is pretty stacked. But my favorite pick might actually be Noel Williams out of California. They traded up to go get him, or moved up to go get him 10 spots or something like that, pick 85. What do you like about the ball hawk and Noel Williams?
First things first, people need to understand that, Jalen Watson's in a contract year. Josh Williams is a contract year. Najee Johnson, who has been kind of a punching bag for fans, but is a guy they've liked and tried to develop. He is on a 1-year deal this year because they tendered him. And they've got some young guys that haven't done a ton. This is a need. Even with them signing Christian Fulton, this is a need beyond this year. What I like about him is a lot of the strengths you describe with him are strengths that you would see with Watson or with Fulton. Guys that have had success as boundary corners with Spags and Merritt. Guys that are really comfortable pressing off the line and are really comfortable in zone coverage. And so he's very physical at the line, really intentional about contact, really intentional about maintaining contact, and not just disrupting with that initial punch off the line, but also as they get onto their routes or meeting them at the stem to slow them down. There's a lot of good things that he does there. He's really smart. And if I were a betting man, this is what Spags and Merritt saw. They are a sucker for smart corners. They love them to a fault occasionally, in my opinion, where they'll maybe favor guys that have some weaknesses but they just love the way that they see the game. He's always calling out stuff. I didn't see him blow a single coverage in 4 games. He passes off guys well. And he just shows a good understanding of how route concepts unfold in front of him that allows him to drive on the ball. I had a lot of people ask me about Marcus Peters because they see high interception numbers and they instantly think Peters, who whatever else you thought of him, had a knack for finding the ball. The difference between Williams and Peters is that Williams, in my opinion, isn't as aggressive about jumping routes. He doesn't really take chances in that same way, at least he didn't in college, but he's always in the right spot. He's always in a position to make a play. So if the throw is errant, he's right there. And that's something that I really, really like. He when he's playing off coverage, which isn't necessarily his strength because guys can run away from him a little bit, and we can get to that in a sec, but he'll drive on throws really well. He times them exceptionally well, and he has good ball skills. That's a combination of things that, that comes into play, because it wasn't just that he had 7 picks. I think he had like 8 passes defense too. He just has a knack for being in the right spot at the right time. He's got decent size, not like high, like elite size like Williams or Watson, but he's 6 foot, 200 pounds. He's a good sized corner. He just does all the things. He's a willing tackler. He's not quite as physical, I don't think, as a tackler as Watson and McDuffie, but that's because those guys are insane. They are always, even when they don't need to, they're like diving into the scrum, and I'm sitting there like, McDuffie, you're an all-pro, please stop. Like, just let the big guys make the tackle. They're there. But he's more than willing to come up to the line of scrimmage and challenge it. He's good with his run fits. All those things are important. The question with him is the same question Jalen Watson had to answer, and he answered in the affirmative, is, are you athletic enough to do it in this league? Because he's not a particularly good athlete. He doesn't accelerate well, which can be problematic because if you miss a jam or you're not able to otherwise mess with the timing of the receiver, guys can walk away from him real fast. His top speed, I think, is actually pretty good, but and you actually see this in his relative athletic score. His 10-yard and 20-yard splits are bad, but his 40 is, it's 4.5. It's not good, but it's not horrible. His splits are worse. He's just not a good change of direction guy. He's not a slot guy, but he fits the mold. He uses the sideline well. It's just going to be a matter of Jalen Watson, because he's so physical, because he's so smart, because he plays things so correctly, snap after snap after snap, and is able to be grabby without drawing flags. He's been able to get away with being a slower corner. He occasionally gets beat, but he's a good corner. That is the type of mold that you're looking for with Williams. And I mean, his tape is good for it. I can see a little bit easier path for him than I do for Gelati, just because the fourth corner sees more snaps usually than your fourth edge. And the Chiefs already have an incumbent fourth edge that they've shown, they spent a first round pick on. That matters in terms of who gets snaps. People would like to think it doesn't. It does. These are people. But I could see him, he's got to hop over, Najee Johnson. He's got to hop over Nick Jones. He's got to hop over a few guys. But there's no one who grabbed that spot. Josh Williams is a guy I like, but Spags doesn't as much as I do, at least in terms of who he gives snaps to. Last year, it was anyone but Williams. He just kept trying out different guys. So he's got some guys to leapfrog. I could see him maybe grabbing that fourth corner spot. It just depends on what Williams and Johnson do. But either way, I think this is an investment for 2026 and beyond. And he's a good special teamer as well.
Yeah, that back end of the cornerback room will be interesting because I feel like they added enough pieces with Fulton, then drafting Knoll, and then if Watson stays healthy, McDuffie as well. You've got enough pieces. The question is, from there, who are they kind of favoriting and who do they really like on special teams? Because I had Najee Johnson on my recent 53-man roster projection from last week. It's a way too early prediction. I always do it after the draft. But I had him making it as cornerback 6, as your core special teamer and depth piece guy. And I was basing that, and that's with the caveat of, hey, Josh Williams was my odd man out for now on the 53-man roster. Not saying that happens, but Josh Williams had no snaps in the playoffs on defense, whereas they actually still continue to rotate Najee in for whatever reason. Fans don't like that, but I'm just looking at the snaps. I'm looking at they're trusting him over Josh Williams for whatever reason. I think Josh Williams probably still makes the roster. I had Roland Wallace over Josh Williams as a backup slot guy, but again, that'll be a very interesting position group to watch for me. It's just the back end of that cornerback room because it's going to be very competitive. Before I get to the next segment, did you guys know that I have an NFL-wide news channel covering all things NFL outside of the Kansas City Chiefs? It's called Cole Breaks the Huddle, and I do a very poor job of letting you guys know that I run a second channel where we drop multiple videos a week covering big picture NFL news. So if you enjoy my style of content with the editing, the pacing, and all that, but want to hear it from an NFL-wide perspective, this is the channel for you. Link is in the description down below. Another competitive room is the wide receiver room. Their 4th round pick was Jalen Royals out of Utah State. Can I ask a question before you get to Jalen Royals? Is Skyy Moore... is he going to survive cuts? Is he going to be on the roster?
Skyy Moore is a guy that has done absolutely everything they've asked him to do in terms of work. And you're like, Seth, that's not an answer. It kind of is. They're going to hang on until they can't. Now, the question I would have for them, and I think you're seeing the same thing, is how many receivers are you keeping on the roster? Because from my perspective, a guy like Nico Remigio has earned a spot on the roster. He's played decently on special teams. He's actually looked okay out there in limited role as a receiver. And so, at what point do you give him a little more volume to see if he can do something that Moore hasn't been able to do with it? With Justin Watson being gone and McCole Hardman being gone, there's opportunities there. So I think he does. I think he does probably survive it. But it's a harder path. Every year you become farther and farther removed from your draft position. And that is the way the NFL works. If you're a draft pick, period, you're going to get more chances than an undrafted guy, of course. But especially if you're drafted in the 1st through 4th round and even into the 5th, they're going to give you chance after chance after chance because of that investment in you, which some might say that's sunk cost fallacy. For me, I still watch Skyy Moore and I'm like, man, those releases are good. How can he not channel that into a productive receiver? But I just, given his particular skill set, when compared to a guy like Royals, I don't know how you justify giving him snaps when there's so many other guys in the room that are better at that particular skill set.
And if they stay healthy, I think that's where the problem is at for me, because you do have Royals now, and we'll talk about him next for sure. But I mean, you've got, as long as everybody stays healthy, Hollywood, Rice, Worthy, Royals, there's your 4 for sure locks. I think you could probably lock in Juju, and Nico is most likely your returner. The problem with some of these other draft picks that people say, well, this guy can be a returner instead of Nico, makes him expendable, talking like Brashard Smith or Jalen Royals. None of those guys really return punts. So Nico's really the only guy that I think they would trust back there at this point in time. It's early, we'll see, but back there returning punts. So there's your 6. So they rolling with 7, and that's Skyy. Like, that's where the questions start to go in my mind. But that's probably a topic for another day. What are your thoughts on Royals, though? Outside receiver, 4.42 40, fastest 10-yard split in this draft class. What did you see when you dug into the film?
I love that you talked about that 10-yard split. One of his best traits, and probably his highest level trait, is that 10-yard acceleration. And that's actually one thing he shares with Rashee Rice. Rice is not a downfield burner, but man, he accelerates, whether it's with the ball in his hand or on slants, ins. And he was even starting to harness that into some of these goes before he got hurt. That's Royals. Same thing. He is not a jitterbug quickness guy, but he accelerates well, whether it's off the line of scrimmage, whether it's out of a break. Whether it's right after he catches the ball, he really has that turbo button in a way that a lot of guys don't. It's a high level trait, and it's one that he weaponizes pretty well. That's one reason why he made so many big plays. I think they're trying to add some explosion to the offense. It'll be tough for him to see the field this year. I think fans need to be ready to see Juju Smith-Schuster get 40 to 50% of the snaps again. I would be surprised if he didn't. Now, we'll see. Them letting Justin Watson walk is like, well, that's interesting, because they clearly have a plan for like the first 3, but Andy is always going to want guys that do the things that Juju Smith-Schuster does. And if he thinks he's got enough speed everywhere else on the field, he'll be willing to sacrifice it for a guy that goes exactly where he's supposed to go. Royals can supplant that by being a superior outside wide receiver. That's one thing that's great with his film, is 80-90% of his snaps were on the outside. You just don't see that a lot with these guys coming out of college. He's got good ball skills. He tracks the ball well as it's coming in over his head. Again, he's got that acceleration ability. He's pretty slippery after the catch. Most of the highlight reels you'll see of him are these big yak plays. And that's a big deal. Like the Chiefs lacked explosion last year. So anyone who can make a play with the ball in their hands, they need more of that. They need more speed. To me, Royals, the idea of Royals for me would be someone who replaces someone like Justin Watson. And even though he maybe doesn't have, I don't think he has quite the same top gear Watson has, but in that first 20 yards, he's much more explosive. And that's where the Chiefs, snap after snap, including in the Super Bowl, they just had too many guys that took too long to gear up. And getting a guy out there with a little more explosion would be great. It'll be tough. He'll have to, probably do some special teams, have to do some of that stuff, because the Chiefs have a pretty clear plan, in my opinion, of their first 4. They obviously have Brown. My hope is they're going to implement the plan they had for him in the first place last year. But you've got Rice as your wide receiver 1, who, if he's healthy, he's going to get 160 targets this year. But, Rice, Worthy, Brown. In a perfect world, Worthy manages to surpass Brown as a receiver and all that fun stuff. And then after that, you've got Juju Smith-Schuster as the veteran guy who knows the system well. And if you're Royals, you really try to jam yourself in there in that 5th spot, also as the best boundary guy, comfortable with contact at the line, pretty strong guy, doesn't get bothered too much. He does need to learn to keep his hands free. He'll occasionally get too engaged in, trying to knock the defender aside, where you don't have to. You brush him off and go, because even if you knock the defender backwards, you're still slowing yourself up so much you're disrupting your route. So I like this film. I'll say it in a more complimentary way than I did with Norman Lott. I see the vision, and I see the vision fitting in a multitude of ways with what the Chiefs like their receivers to do.
Yeah, I could see Royals running a lot of routes, but he's not necessarily the intended target. If that's like your Justin Watson kind of guy. But I am intrigued to see what ends up happening there. With the wide receiver room. Juju is a guy that's like, he is expendable from like a financial standpoint. It's not expensive, but I think he's very valuable for a multitude of reasons. You mentioned a couple, but Mahomes' trust, obviously you could offset Kelsey in the middle of the field. You can use him a lot in the blocking aspect of the offense, and that's what they like to use him a lot for. So I feel like Juju, when I put him as like my wide receiver 5, it's just more of like the 4 locks from a contractual cost standpoint, those 4, and then Juju is right next just because you could move on from him. I just don't think they do. So I'm very intrigued to see what happens there. They rolled with like, I think 7 wide receivers on the initial 53. I could see Skyy sneaking in once again to a bunch of fans' dismay. But if they roll with 6, that's where it's going to get interesting because he had a big old goose egg last year from a production standpoint, talking about Skyy. Another room to watch, I don't think this player that they drafted was in their plans because I don't think he was going to be available, but linebacker Jeffrey Bossa, I feel like the linebacker room's in a good spot, but you can never have enough depth. And then Drew Tranquill, we don't know what his life is like after this season. He's also 31 years old. Leo Chanel's on the last year of his deal. I know you haven't looked at the film as highly or as heavily yet because you're working through the draft picks here, but from what you saw from Bossa and what you've heard, how do you like that in the fit in the linebacker room?
I mean, he's got a similar profile in some ways that Drew Tranquill had coming out because he used to be a safety and he moves like it. He moves like he's either a huge safety or a small linebacker, which 20 years ago might have been a ticket to not being able to find a spot in the league. Today, not nearly as big a deal. He's pretty solid with his run fits. And so he's people think about him and they immediately say, oh, well, a pass defending linebacker. But he overall in Oregon was good as a run defender as well. He wasn't just a coverage guy. I love his athleticism, though. I think the defense, the athletic or the linebacker group in particular, everyone loves Leo Chanel. He can do down the field coverage out of the backfield, but his change of direction, his athletic testing at the combine aside, on film, his change of direction just isn't good. His closing speed's terrific, but he's not a change of direction, pure coverage guy. Drew Tranquill actually, in my opinion, kind of had a bit of a down year in 24 after a really good 23 year. But, he's more a guy that can rely on coverage. Bolton, that subject's been talked to death. He does some things really well in coverage, and he's learned to overcome his lack of change of direction and overall burst. But really what it comes down to me is a numbers game. Like you said, Drew Tranquill is going to be in the second year of this deal that they gave him. Then, that third year, who knows what they might do with it, depending on how he does. Chanel's in the last year of his contract. I think he's probably... He's an interesting player because he's so much more useful in Spag's system than he would be in certain other systems. But there are a few other systems that I think he could be on the field 80% of the snaps instead of 40 or 50% of the snaps. And so I think you might end up priced out of him. You don't know that. And so I think he's a guy that you can get that's a really athletic core special teamer who also you're building towards what 2026 looks like in potential for a guy who can be on the field for really important snaps, especially if he's as comfortable in coverage in the pros as he was in college.
And I like that Mike linebacker experience, but also last year, Don the Green Dot too. Not saying he would do anything like that this year, but the ability to have a backup after Nick Bolton, especially if they're moving on from Tranquill, or we don't know what the room looks like in the future, but I do love it from that mindset. And then the last pick of the draft is another one that it's like, well, I wasn't sure when they would get a running back. I thought it would actually be a little bit earlier than that, but Jeffrey Bossa was still available, and they were like, we got to get this guy because of how high he was still on their board, yet still available. So you then have Brashard Smith out of SMU with the 7th round pick. And again, I can see the need. I've said, hey, you got to get a running back in this draft. It's so deep class. And then Pacheco, last year of his deal, Elijah Mitchell 1-year deal, Kareem Hunt 1-year deal, Carson Steele kind of like a question mark because unless Andy Reid just wants the fullback to have the fullback on the roster, I feel like Kareem Hunt can do your short yardage stuff, though Carson Steele would be more like he could do special teams and stuff that Hunt would not. But I like the pick for Brashard, at least from like a future standpoint. How do you feel like he could fit in the running back room? I know a 7th round pick is not safe to make the roster. I think they had probably like a 5th-ish round grade on him though, and the class was just so deep he kind of fell to them.
Right. I think the thing with Smith is he's got such a skill set that's peculiar for the running back room that there's a spot for him to get snaps. The thing that's going to be tough for him, having switched, during college from wide receiver to running back, one thing that people should keep in mind with him, he's not like 180-pound switch over. I mean, he's not a tiny back. Now he's not a strong one either, but he's not tiny either. The thing for him making that switch is going to be pass protection. Are you willing to do it? And are you capable of doing it? Are you able to pick it up? Because the athleticism is there. It'll also be interesting to watch his vision kind of develop. I've watched a couple games of his now, and he's a guy who he can actually, I was impressed with how well he could see holes as they opened up. And it helps when you've got significantly better burst than most other running backs, because you buy that 1/10 of a second when you accelerate, and he accelerates really well. He plays like a guy who would be a pretty fast receiver playing running back. He reads that stuff pretty well, but he's not like anticipatory with it at this point. He's not like setting up blockers the way you might see Hunt do it. Hunt just doesn't have the explosion anymore, right? And so that's something, though, that, okay, well, does that develop over a year or two as he continues to make the transition? I'm really interested in that. But the big thing will be pass blocking, because he, in terms of being a receiver, easily the most dangerous receiver out of the backfield they have on the roster. And it's not even close. Not just in terms of being so much faster than everyone else, which opens up a wide range of things, but he's got decent ball skills. I mean, you could tell he used to play receiver. A wide receiver with average ball skills is going to have elite ball skills for a running back. And that's what he looks like. If you're just gauging him as a running back, you're like, wow, this guy's an incredible receiver. And so his burst, his explosiveness, to kind of returns to the Royals point, they looked slow at times last year on offense, which is ridiculous when you have Hollywood Brown and Xavier Worthy out there. But Travis Kelce wins a certain way these days, and it's not with explosion, generally speaking. He's still got a good top speed, but he's not just running away from guys anymore, because no one accelerates like they used to when they're 35. Like, that's just not how this works. But when you combine that with Watson and with Juju, there were times they just looked painfully slow with Kareem Hunt. That's a lot of guys that are well below average in athleticism at their spots. Now on third down, you have the potential to throw Smith out there if you like what he can potentially do as a pass blocker. Now you suddenly have, let's say he's out there instead of Hunt. And let's say Royals is out there instead of Watson. And let's say you've got Rashee Rice back on there instead of Juju Smith-Schuster, and you still got Worthy out there, you still got Brown out there. Suddenly you've got a much, much faster offense, particularly in that first 20 yards. And that's going to be huge when you're thinking about pass rush and that kind of stuff. So I like what he brings. It's all in theory, though. And so he's going to be one. It won't surprise me if early in training camp, before they have their first pads day, he has at least one day where people are like, holy smokes, this is incredible. And I'm just urging everyone, and this is with everyone every year, wait until the pads come on, because it's not real football until the pads come on. And that includes not just the trenches, but running routes too. There's just not as much contact. There's always receivers and guys in the secondary that look great until the pads come on, and then they just can't run through contact. That's so much of success at the pro level.
Yeah, I'll be very curious to see, because he returned kicks too, so he could maybe be one of your primary kick return guys, especially now that they move the touchback to the 35 or whatever it is now. I think you're going to see a ton of returns. And Dave Tobe last year, he liked your returner and then like a blocker guy. So like Carson Steele was back there at times. I feel like now you could just be like, you can have just two returners back there. We'll see. But I do like his odds, especially the third fastest running back of this class with the 4.39, of at least being able to help out there on special teams. But very curious to see what happens in the rotation in the running back room. I'm not going to expect much initially. I do think he makes the roster just because of the longevity there, or the lack of longevity at the position from a contractual standpoint. But it's not like he's 100% he's not a first round pick. He's not like, oh, that guy's a lock. So we'll see. The last 7th round pick, Isaiah Pacheco, found a way to contribute in a pretty productive way. I know some people are down on him right now, but just because of how he looked coming back from that injury, I think he bounces back from that. But we'll see. All in all, you had a really good point that the Chiefs seem to have placed an emphasis not just on getting fast guys, but quick off the line guys. Because a lot of times in this offense, and you could talk circles around me in this subject, but they want the quick option, and they want that guy to get open, because Mahomes likes to throw to the open guy. And one thing that the Eagles were really able to do in the Super Bowl, they took away that first read, and you just didn't have a lot of guys out there with that burst right off the line. So it seems like they're trying to address that, and I'll be very intrigued to see how the offense as a whole looks this season. because when I look at the defense, I feel much more positive about them with what they've addressed. But the offense for me is like, okay, can the left tackle spot hold up? Joe Tooney's gone. How's that going to look? But more questions, but I am very excited.
I think what you see on offense, and I actually wrote about this a few weeks ago, is that it's almost like they're trying to execute the 2024 plan in 2025. They wanted to become explosive. They wanted to become down the field. And you saw that actually play out a little bit in their first few weeks, even as Worthy was developing. They were trying to still do it. But one problem that they had was, well, they had multiple problems. They had the Brown injury really set them back. And the way it happened set them back, right? Because they were like, oh, he's only out for a little while. So then you don't really reformulate the season-long game plan because, oh, he's coming back. Oh, turns out he's not. And you find that out 2 or 3 weeks into the season. And then in the meantime, right as they were learning about that, they had the fiasco at left tackle that forced them to kind of really try to scramble. And then Rashee Rice gets hurt. Yep. And so it really, and then Worthy wasn't ready for the same load that he was ready for later in the season early on. And so it really just messed with a lot of things. To me, it feels like the offense feels like they had the pieces last year, but really bad luck got in the way. And their thought is, well, not just bad luck. I mean, because the Kingsley Suamataia kind of fiasco, they put all their eggs in a rookie second round left tackle. That's not fair to him. And that's what happened. And it blew up in their face a little bit. Now, I mean, they still made the Super Bowl. So, I mean, like, it's still, worked out.
It was a struggle to get there, but you got there. It was.
The thing that I think they're looking at is, okay, our offensive line overall is going to be better because we're not going to have a glaring hole in one spot. And that's the thing you're trying to avoid with offensive line play, that lack of a glaring hole. And they had him last year. And so I think their hope is to avoid that glaring hole to where they can open up that downfield stuff and then, hope for better health and luck with your receivers while getting more explosive. And so you see an intentionality there. I get the idea in theory. I would have liked to see maybe one more weapon added, but at a certain point, it's just, did you fix the trenches or not? And they've now invested quite a bit into fixing them.
Yeah, I feel like when you looked at like the main issues on the roster, both sides of the ball last year, they've really tried. We'll see, but like cornerback room addressed. I mean, for sure, the safety room could take a little bit of a step back, maybe with Justin Reed gone, but they like what they see in Jaden Hicks. So if the safety room takes a little bit of a step back, but the cornerback room takes a big step forward, I like that. You address some of the needs on the D-line and then left tackle. And then with the wide receiver room, you just like, can they stay healthy? Can Pacheco, can Rice, Hollywood, Pacheco's not a receiver, but just saying like playmakers on offense, can they stay healthy? If so, I think the Chiefs probably win the West again. I think they're back in the playoffs again. You got all these hot takes right now. The Chiefs aren't winning the West. I know I'm biased as a Chiefs fan. I'm just not. I think the gap is closing in the sense of like the Chiefs are not a skyscraper above the Chargers and the Broncos anymore, but I still think they're above both of these teams and they're going to win the West. I'll be very curious to see, obviously, how it all plays out months from now.
Yeah, me too. This is the time of year. It's never going to be popular to pick the incumbent. They've won it
9 or 10 years in a row.
Coming up on 10 years. They've been winning it for so long that eventually, if you just pick someone else, if you pick the field out of 4 teams every single year, eventually you'll be right. Maybe this is the year you now have, a proven, competent coach in Vegas with a proven, competent quarterback. That's going to make a world of difference there. The Chargers have talent. The Broncos have shown a lot of flashes. So yeah, sure, it's a tougher division, but that's what we heard last year too. And the Chiefs had it all wrapped up after they won on Christmas. And so we'll see. They still have the best coach. They still have the best quarterback. And I don't know how close it is, particularly in the quarterback realm. So I actually think the defense, and we'll see, because the Justin Reed thing I think might be tougher than people think, unless Jaden Hicks is exactly who they think he is. And if he is, they'll be good to go at that position. And they love Jaden Hicks. I will say that the defense looks in position with the signing of Fulton to be 3 corners deep that they really trust, that are really good again. And with Amenahu being healthy this year, I think it has a chance to resemble the 2023 defense down the stretch more so than the 2024 defense, which was good. It just wasn't elite. It was good to very good, but wasn't quite as suffocating. I think they've got a chance to replicate that.